Now, I spent those 6 years studying the world's most spectacular examples of back-from-the-dead communities, really dramatic revitalization stories. And I was on a kind of a holy grail quest. I didn't know if it would be successful or not, but I was looking for universal factors and principles that other communities could reliably replicate. And I found some. Here they are. I found 3 renewal rules: re-wealth, integration, and engagement. First one simply, and these are all decision-making tools for a community. First one simply says that we should base our economic growth, our wealth creation, primarily on renewing our assets. Doesn't mean we'll never sprawl or extract. It just means that should be the default. This is as opposed to de-wealth, which is wealth creation based on depleting resources and developing raw land. Nothing wrong with that. That's how you build a civilization. But at some point, when you've got a finite planet and 1 billion new people every 15 years, it no longer is the appropriate way forward. So re-wealth is wealth creation that's based on redeveloping the places we've already developed and on replenishing the resources that were depleted. Now, the second rule is integration. As we're doing all this asset renewal, we should integrate the renewal of the natural environment, the built environment, the socioeconomic environment. That's where you get your efficiencies and synergies. You can double and triple the value of each dollar spent. Third one is engagement. Effectively engaging all the stakeholders who are either involved in or affected by this revitalization program. When those 3 things come together, it's like playing a chord. It doesn't matter how well you choose 1 or 2 notes, you got to have the right 3 to get a chord. And a chord produces something that's more than the sum of its parts. You use those 3 rules together in making decisions about the future of the community. Every time I've seen that happen, you've had magical back-from-the-dead stories. I found 3 renewal processes, too. And by process, I mean an activity that creates a solution. The visioning, culturing, partnering. By visioning, I just mean that the cities that really came back dramatically always had a shared vision of where they were going. And you'd think that's kind of a fuzzy, touchy-feely sort of thing. Who really needs a vision? All we need is projects and plans. But the fact is that a project is just how you implement a plan. And a plan is how you implement a strategy. And a strategy is how you implement a vision. If you don't have an underlying vision, the rest of that doesn't have a foundation. And it's asking planners to plan without a vision, that's planner abuse. It's asking them to plan in the dark. It's not the planner's job to come up with a vision of where you want to go in the future. Culturing, creating a renewal culture that both welcomes investment and treats it well once it gets there. I constantly hear all these nightmare stories from redevelopers and responsible restorative investors who come to a community, propose doing something that the community desperately needs, and they're sitting on borrowed money, the interest is piling up, and they spend the next 2 years jumping through all kinds of bureaucratic hurdles, trying to get exceptions to this building code, that zoning, this incentive, all these policies that were set up to support sprawl, and that don't support redevelopment and revitalization and restoration. So you've got to work on that constantly. Partnering is the third process. Communities need to become better partners, both with, not just with the private sector, but with other levels of the public sector, state and federal. And there's a whole new breed of partnership evolving right now. I call them renewal partnerships. And what sets them apart is that they're based, they operate according to those rules. They play by the rules, the 3 renewal rules. They're re-wealth oriented, they do it in an integrated manner, and they engage all the stakeholders. Now, I even found an ideal organizational model for organizing and funding all of this. I called it a renewal engine because each community that had already invented it called it something different. And I was trying to standardize this so it could be replicated. And I called it an engine because it generates a constant flow of renewal partnerships. And that's how a distressed community, maybe even a community that's broke, can revitalize itself even in a distressed economy. It gives you that ability to keep on revitalizing despite changes of political administration, despite the comings and goings of federal funding. Second question was, how can our federal government at least double the revitalizing impact of that $787 billion economic stimulus package? Now, those stimulus funds are in desperate need of a finer filter, project filter, than just shovel ready. I mean, that's a pretty blunt filter. We could greatly enhance the economic impact of that stimulus if they were to make project decisions based on those 3 rules. Make sure each project was restorative, revitalizing, re-wealth oriented, redeveloping. It wasn't just some highway to nowhere that's going to support sprawl in the future. If each one was done in an integrated manner to make it more efficient, and if each one properly engaged all the stakeholders to make sure this is something that people really want and need. It's not rocket science. I'd love to see, as a matter of fact, an executive order from the White House directing federal agencies to make all their buying decisions, project decisions, based on those 3 rules. That could rapidly enhance the economy, the quality of life, the environmental health of the country with no budget increases, just by better spending. In other words, we can apply the community recipe for rapid, resilient renewal to solving our national renewal challenge. Infrastructure funding, that's the biggest chunk of it. That alone could have a much greater community revitalization impact if we just added a little more integration and engagement to the spending of those funds. After all, infrastructure comprises the very internal organs and structure of a community and a nation. In case there's anybody in here who's struggling with the definition of infrastructure, don't feel bad, even when I've got a room full of civil engineers. And I say, does anybody here have a concise definition of infrastructure? I never get a hand. So I had to invent my own a couple of years ago. My definition of infrastructure is that it's everything that connects our built environment and allows for flows. Flows of traffic, flows of energy, flows of information, flows of power, flows of solid waste, flows of water, flows of sewage. That's our infrastructure, and it's handy to think of it in terms of flows because that's the essence of bringing a place back to life. It's the essence of bringing anything back to life. A human body, an ecosystem, it's all based on flows. You'd likely be appalled if you were really aware of the vast extent of the lack of integration amongst all the different kinds of infrastructure we have in this country. It's all done in silos, and that makes it wasteful and it makes it fragile. We could get so many cost efficiencies and social synergies that would arise just from better integrating the many forms of infrastructure renewal. While we're on definitions, here's the definition I use of revitalization, in case you were wondering. To me, revitalization is economic growth that enhances quality of life and environmental health. So if your environmental health is going up at the same time as your quality of life and your economy is growing, that's revitalization. There are forms of economic growth that will decrease quality of life and environmental health. We've been seeing that for about 5,000 years. That brings us to that third and last question. How can real estate investors and redevelopers predict which communities are about to come back to life, or which ones are going to continue their economic growth and quality of life enhancement, so their projects will benefit from that rising economy? And to answer that question, we need to briefly review the old revitalization strategy that is now largely discredited, but is unfortunately still in large use by communities all across the country. It's, for many decades, planners have been taught that to increase quality of life in a community, you need to attract employers. Yeah, sounds logical enough. So for the last few decades, communities have been involved in this zero-sum game of stealing employers from each other, shuffling jobs back and forth, and they're attracting the employers by giving away their future tax revenues. That can temporarily help a community, but shuffling jobs around from one community to another doesn't help the state at all or the nation. There's no economic growth there, although the numbers do show economic growth every time they're shuffled from one city to the other. In fact, it actually damages state and national economies when cities try to revitalize like this, because what often happens, as we're seeing now in many places, the states and the feds end up having to bail out these communities when they can't meet their budgets anymore. That approach is backwards. If you look at the communities that have successfully revitalized over a long period of time, they didn't do it like that. They did it in reverse. They renewed their quality of life first, and that attracted the employers who actually want to be there, not the ones who are going to run away as soon as the freebies run out. Now, this re-wealth strategy is also a no-lose proposition, since what's the worst that can happen?